As someone that collects disc-based video games, nothing as far back as, cartridges, but disc-based video games from the 21st century, I never thought that I would be someone who would be purchasing a discless console. The Xbox Series S is a fantastic value. I understood that, but I really didn't think I could get behind discless gaming until I really took a look at my collection and determined what really was important to me and what games I really felt like I would be playing going forward, and if they would be playable going forward, because I've talked a lot in the past about Xbox One games and the reality that the discs, while it's great to own them, maybe they look good on a shelf, they don't really serve any long-term purpose. So long as the servers are up, you're able to download the day one patches that are associated with the vast majority of those Xbox One games. Those discs will be playable in the future. If those servers aren't up, those day one patches are not available, those discs are essentially useless. I mean, oftentimes, especially later into the generation, there's like 100 megabytes on those discs. It's not a playable game whatsoever. And for the earlier titles that came out where maybe there was a very rough version of the game on the disc, it's just simply not a good experience without that day one patch. And then you take it another step back and you look at the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. Yes, those are much more complete games. Would it be great if you had the updates? Yes, but it's not necessarily a necessity that you have them. But we've kind of got to a point where those games are becoming a lot more accessible. And I don't just mean necessarily legitimately through the Xbox, backwards compatibility program and all the titles that they've added to that. And I understand they're not adding any more titles as far as Xbox 360 goes to that backwards compatible library. They've kind of tapped it out, maxed it out. This is what we got. It's what we got right now. And they're not going to add any more. But PlayStation 3 games, whether you want to play PlayStation 3 backup copies via a modded PlayStation 3, which is crazy easy to do with Hen these days, or you want to emulate PlayStation 3 games on your PC, or eventually we'll get to a point where Xbox 360 emulation on PC has improved, but the reality is emulating these PS3 and Xbox 360 games is becoming more and more of a reality every day, as well as just playing backup copies of PlayStation 3 games on the original hardware very easily, and playing backup copies of 360 games on their original hardware if you're willing to get, the RGH or whatever things that all the modders used to use, so you can play backup games on those devices. So the reality is, many of these discs that I have long so coveted are playable by digital means, whether officially or unofficially, and I don't own any games that are particularly rare. To take example, the most rare Xbox 360 game I own is Blitz to League 2. Huge football fan. Owning Blitz to League 2 is something, I'm really excited about. It used to be like a $70 game or something. Maybe it's like a $50 game now. But it's one of those games where if you wanted to find a backup copy of it, you could find somebody that could have a disc, that could get it ripped for you. You could get a backup copy. It's not like the game is lost to time. I think that oftentimes people that collect physical video game media have this idea that they're kind of saving it, they're preserving it, and they're keeping it from being lost to time, when in reality, many of these games, in fact 99.99% of them, are already digitized in some fashion by groups that the publishers don't necessarily like, but they have digitized these games from all the previous generations. And these super rare games maybe that they haven't digitized, that have fallen through the cracks, well, they're not the kind of games that I actually own. The rarest Xbox 360 game I own is Blitz the League 2, which everything, beyond that, I don't need to own a copy of Assassin's Creed 3 because that's, been digitized, and everybody and their grandma owns a copy of Assassin's Creed 3 on Xbox 360. So I don't need to feel like I need to own that for the sake of preserving it for the larger gaming community. And I understand that if everybody had the same train of thought that I did and accepted that, maybe then we lose future generations of game backups. But the reality is, the physical discs, at least going forward, don't contain very much data. So I took all of this into, consideration, took into consideration the fact that, ironically, the Xbox Series S can play many retro games because of the presence of Retroarch, be it through retail mode or developer mode, and I talked about that a few weeks ago before I even bought the console. I'm just so impressed by what you're able to do with Retroarch on this console, and obviously Retroarch's been available on PC for a long time, and you could do all of this on PC, but doing it on a $300 console that's readily available, I just picked mine up and bought it at Walmart right off the shelf. That's insane to me. So while ironically the system can't play older games, that are disc-based because you can't plop your 360 or original Xbox disc in there like you could on a Series X, you can ironically play backups of GameCube and PS2 games, not to mention purchase many of those original Xbox or Xbox 360 games just from the digital marketplace. And I know kind of like in mid-January, there was a cool sale that was going on where Xbox had a ton of Xbox 360 and original Xbox downloadable titles on sale, like for $2.50, $5 a piece. And most of those games, take Time Splitters Future Perfect, for instance, which came out, I think, late 2021. That's a downloadable title, backwards compatible on the Xbox Series. It was $2.50. If you wanted to buy the disc, the original Xbox disc of Time Splitters Future Perfect, it's like $70 or something. I think the last time I checked, maybe last year. I mean, just crazy expensive games. People to download it for that price obviously is a great deal, and it had some enhancements, like it had like 4K 60, I think it's supported on the Xbox Series X and S, so it definitely was upscaled, and you could have got that if you'd put the disc into the Xbox Series X too, I understand, but buying that disc is not financially feasible compared to just paying $2.50 for it to download it. And I'll be the first to tell you that I understand not every single game released on the original Xbox and the Xbox 360 is available, and not every single game is going to emulate well. If you had PlayStation 2 games you loved when you were a kid, you were very nostalgic about them, they don't maybe run very well because not every PlayStation 2 game runs great on here. That's understandable. The hope is that we'll eventually get to a point in time where that is the case. Now, I'm talking, I know people like really obscure games. Like, I think it's hilarious that the Chicken Little game is available as a backwards compatible original Xbox title that you can play on the Xbox Series X and S. I think that's hilarious, but there's somebody out there where they're very nostalgic for the Chicken Little game. That could have been their first video game ever, could have been something they grew up playing, and for them, they're very nostalgic about it, and it's not just a kid's licensed game to them. So I understand the appeal of some of these more obscure games, maybe don't run very well, or don't necessarily always get re-released in this fashion. So if you don't own a 4K TV, and you've been hesitant about buying the Xbox Series S because you're like, I don't know if I can go discless, trust me, you probably can, because the reality is the discs that you've been collecting, at least for the last, 8 years of this past generation, aren't really worth their weight in, salt, because the reality is they're very barren discs that include very little software, and it's really just that ability to transfer the license physically and sell that used copy. And yes, I understand that there is a discount to that. I've taken advantage of that throughout my time as a gamer, over the last 20 years. I've bought hundreds of used games because that was the cheaper way to buy them. But at this point in time, as far as the gaming, subscription services go, and just the accessibility of these sales every single Monday night or Tuesday morning, whenever they pop up in your time zone, I think that you can get yourself a good deal on these games still if you just have some patience. Can you get it maybe as quickly as possible? Did I want to buy Far Cry 6 at the beginning of the year when it was $20 on disc at GameStop, and I didn't because it was $36 to download, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get, a discless system, and it was $16 more to buy it digitally than I could have got the disc at GameStop. But I know that eventually Far Cry 6 will be $20 to download because every Ubisoft game goes down in price like that. So it's just a matter of time, and it's, me taking the time to play other games first, and ultimately, kind of just balancing my time and keeping myself from having this huge backlog, which I know can be easy to do when you're buying digital games and you don't even realize how much space they're taking up because you don't physically see them. So it's easy to just kind of start hoarding them, not actually get around to playing them. So waiting for a deal can be a good reason to put off a purchase. So if you were on the fence about the Xbox Series S, I would say go for it. I think we've reached a point where owning the physical media doesn't necessarily do you a great service when there's so little actually on the disc for these modern games. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.